Good evening and welcome. My name is Jackson, and today I've taken up the role of performance analyst. I'll be presenting my assessment, which will be based on providing match analysis and feedback on two sporting events, with one being a review and analysis of a competitive game just passed, and the other a qualitative analysis and preview of an upcoming game. I will aim to identify key features of the game that may have contributed to the result and offer recommendations as to how we can approach the upcoming game in a particular way that may improve our chances of getting a result. The sport I will be analysing today is rugby league. Rugby league is a sport predominantly played in Australia, New Zealand, England, and the Pacific Islands. The aim of the game is to score more points than the other team by scoring a try, worth 4 points, in which a player places a rugby ball over the try line they are facing, and kicking a conversion worth 2 points, in which players will perform a place kick of the rugby ball and try to direct it towards the two upright posts. Players can also score a drop goal, in which players will perform a drop kick and try to get the ball to fly in between the upright posts and over the horizontal bar, worth 1 point. Any one of these must be achieved within 6 tackles, or the opposition will receive the ball and attempt to perform the same action. Players can be stopped from advancing towards the try line by being tackled, in which the offensive player must then stand back up and strike the ball with his foot so it rolls underneath him. The hooker, who stands directly behind the player performing this action, then passes or runs the ball and the play continues. At the highest level, the game is played with the duration of two 40-minute halves. During this time, only 13 players maximum are allowed on the field to play at any one time. Each team is allowed 4 reserve players, however each team is only allowed to perform 10 substitutions or player swaps per game. In the lower grades and youth competition, the substitutions allowed is decreased to 8. Players on each team commonly fall under 3 branches. A player is either a middle forward, who is predominantly strong and powerful, an outside back, who is predominantly fast and agile, or a half and hooker, who is the playmaker of the team. Within the sport of rugby league lies 6 main competitions in Australia. The highest tier competition is the NRL, followed by reserve grades in both New South Wales and Queensland. The clubs in this competition act as feeder clubs for the NRL teams, either promoting their best players to the NRL or housing those who are contracted to NRL clubs but are not selected to play that week. Next step from that is the Jersey Flag Under-20 competition, who provide a stepping stone to the NRL for the country's best young players. Below that are the SG Ball and Harold Matthews competitions, which provide representative honours to higher level under 18 and under 16 rugby league players respectively. For the purpose of this assessment, we will be looking on a particular team within the SG Ball competition. The SG Ball competition is comprised of 16 representative teams, each an affiliate of an NRL club. There are 13 teams from New South Wales clubs, 1 team from the ACT, 1 team from Victoria, and 1 team from WA that are currently competing in the competition. The regular season lasts for 9 rounds, in which after that, the top 8 teams playing finals football in the same format as the NRL until there is a winner. The team that will be focused on for this assessment is the Balmain Tigers SG Ball side, who are currently competing in this year's SG Ball competition. At the time of analysis, the club had a record of 1 win and 1 loss. Their last game was a competitive match against the Canberra Raiders, played in Canberra, in which they were successful. Their next competitive match will be against the Illawarra Steelers in Wollongong. Their team has a number of key players, including their halfback Cooper Wood, left and right centre pairing of Levi Sakuru and Josh Risk, their lock and captain Daniel Sykes, 5'8" Zane Camero, their second row pairing of Zane Wilkins and Henry O'Kane, and their hooker Jake Custer. If Balmain are to be as competitive as their aspirations hope, they will need these key players to be performing well. The opposition team analysed in this assessment is one of the favourites of the competition, the Illawarra Steelers. At the time of writing, the Steelers had a record of 1 win and 1 loss, losing last week to Parramatta 20-28 at home. Their key players include halfback Jaden Sullivan, centre Aaron Shoup, wing Terrell Sloan, and lock Zach Herring. When performing analysis, we need to understand the purpose of the procedure. Vogelbein et al. Summarized performance analysis as observing performance indicators and facilitating objective quantification of performance. In doing so, we are able to both compare both past performances and predict future performances. For the purpose of this study, the main objectives were to observe performance indicators and predict probability of winning future matches, identify strengths of the team, identify areas of improvement for the team, identify risks and opportunities of opposition for the next match, and identify areas of opportunity that are not instantly obvious. To perform the analysis of the data, I first had to obtain the videos of the matches. I was able to obtain such video through Huddle, in which I was able to separate the video into individual highlights when needed. I used Excel for the majority of my analysis due to the ease in which I was able to summarize and grasp the data. After capturing and before analyzing, we need to identify what we are actually looking for in the video and in the data. Palmer 2017 found that out of all contributors to team success in rugby league, the following seem to be most relevant to winning. Scoring first had an odds ratio of 2.9 and a probability of winning of 0.74. Completed sense had an odd ratio of 1.6 and a probability of winning of 0.61. Current league position had an odds ratio of 1.2 and a probability of winning of 0.54. Successful collections had an odd ratio of 1.1 and a probability of winning of 0.52. With successful collections, we can assume that less errors may equal more successful collections. Lastly, a dominant carry had an odds ratio of 1.1 and a probability of winning of 0.52. Through the data, we can assume that more tackle breaks would equal more dominant carries. Before we move on with our match analysis, we first need to understand the terminology that is used within the presentation, so we are able to grasp what is actually being reported. The following terms listed below will be used. Now for our review of Game 2 versus Canberra. The game was held at Belconnen Oval in Canberra. In the previous game, the Balmain Tigers lost 24-26 away to the St George Dragons and currently sat 9th on the league table. In the previous game for Canberra, they were away to West Coast Pirates in Western Australia and won 64-20. Throughout the game, the key metrics were: in the completed sets, Balmain had completed 21 out of 29 sets for a total of 72%, whilst Canberra completed 18 of 29 sets for 62%. The first try went to the Canberra Raiders, and the number of errors completed were Balmain Tigers 5, Canberra Raiders 10. The halftime score was Balmain Tigers 8, Canberra Raiders 16, and the final score was Balmain Tigers 44, Canberra Raiders 16. In a review of the Tigers' attack against Canberra, we can see our key metrics on the left-hand side of the screen. Our completions in the first half were 9 of 11 for 81.8%, and in the second half, our completions were 14 of 17 for 82.3%. For our yardage sets, our first half, we had 5 total attempts and we completed 4 of those for 80%, whilst in the second half, we had 15 total sets of yardage and completed 12 of those at 80%. We finished with our yardage sets of a rate of 16 completions from 20 attempts, or 80%. For our good ball sets, in the first half, we completed 5 of 6 for 83.3%, and in the second half, we only had 2 good ball sets, but we completed all of them for an 100% completion rate. We finished the day with a total completion rate of 7 attempts from 8 sets, for a completion rate of 87.5%. Other metrics include our successful collections, which were at 296 and were 58.3% of the total collections of the whole game. Our total errors were 5, which only accounted for 33.3% of total errors committed, and our tackle breaks were 46, which accounted to 64.8% of total tackle breaks. If we have a look at our graphs on the right, we can see that in the first half, the Tigers had a significantly less number of plays as opposed to the Raiders. However, in the second half, we can see that the tide changed completely, where the Tigers had a lot more plays as opposed to the Raiders had very minimal. If we look in the second graph beneath it, we can see the completion rates of the two teams, and we can see that in the first half, both the Tigers and the Raiders' completion rates were roughly around 80%, but in the second half, we can see that the Raiders' completion rate dropped off considerably to below 40%, while the Tigers maintained their completion rate. Key observations from our attack include that while we did not have a large amount of time in offense in the first half, our completed sets percentage maintained at a high level throughout the duration of the match. Our low error count for the duration of the match meant that we spent more time with the ball in offense, resulting in more opportunities to score. This allowed us to capitalize on the fatigue building from high number of tackles that Canberra was having to make, with Canberra making 246 tackles in the game compared to 203 from Balmain, resulting in many tries coming from yardage sets in the second half, 4 tries in total, which don't normally happen. We'll see an example of a try from the yardage set, and just take note as to the fatigue levels of the Canberra Raiders. This try was just after half time, so you'd expect the Canberra Raiders to still have high amounts of energy, but you can see that they're already starting to tire. From a defensive standpoint, we can see that Canberra had a considerable drop-off from the first half to second half in terms of completions. They also had a considerable drop-off in terms of their yardage completions and total yardage attempts, and their good ball drop-off was to that extent that they could not complete a set. Their successful collections were only 41% of the total game. Their errors accounted for 61%, including 8 in the second half. And their tackle breaks only accounted to 35% of the total game. If you have a look at the graph on the right, we just compare the sets and the errors in each half, and as you can see, in the first half, Raiders had a lot of sets and minimal errors. In the second half, the errors increased, and therefore the amount of sets that the Raiders had decreased as the Tigers were able to maintain the ball longer. When we consider the key observations, we notice that Canberra had a lot of possession in the first half. That was down in part to Balmain conceding 8 penalties and giving Canberra 8 extra sets of attack. In the second half, Balmain conceded no penalties, and therefore Canberra didn't have that extra sets of attack. We could see that Canberra was starting to tire, and the intensity of Balmain's defence was noticeable. You'll see in the next video an example of the playmakers of the Canberra Raiders making costly errors as a result of fatigue and the intensity of the defence. For our opposition analysis, we reviewed the Illawarra's last game against the Parramatta Eels. This was played at the Wollongong home ground. In Illawarra's previous game, they had a 36-4 away win against the Cronulla Sharks and currently sat 6th on that table. For Parramatta, they had a 16-10 away win against the Central Coast Roosters and was sitting at 4th. Key metrics for the game included Illawarra completing their sets at 66%, while Parramatta completed their sets at 52%. The first try went to the Parramatta Eels, and the number of errors were very high, with Illawarra having 13 errors and Parramatta 11. At halftime, the score was Steelers 16, Eels 6. The final score, Steelers 20, 28, Parramatta. When observing Illawarra in attack, we can see that they're a very high error team. They throw a lot of risky plays, and some of them don't always pay off. In yardage sets, they're most likely to run a channel set through central and then kick to either the left or right corner, and this happens 63.6% of the players that started in yardage. If they're deep in yardage, they'll usually throw an early ball to the closest centre. Normally, the deep start was on the left-hand side, therefore they were throwing it to Aaron Shoup, who received it roughly 56% of the time. When they're in good ball situations, Jaden Sullivan will perform a switch with a forward and then receive a ball on the short side and perform a switch with the nearest outside back. And this occurred 36% of all good ball scenarios throughout the game against Parramatta. And Illawarra also scored 3 of their 4 tries from open play, with lots of players contributing. They seem to be more successful in open play, such as a counter-attack or a line break, than through structured plays and sets. You'll see an example in the next slide. When observing Illawarra's defence, we can see that they're really leaky on the left-hand side. Jaden Sullivan, the halfback who plays on the left-hand side, actually missed 6 tackles throughout the game and also a crucial tackle on the opposition line that resulted in a try. I would recommend aiming our attack towards him. Zach Herring, the lock who plays in the middle as well, is also a poor defender. He missed multiple tackles against Parramatta, so that could be an option to direct our play down the middle as well. When observing all the data through a SWOT analysis, we can see that the strengths of the team are when Balmain has a high completion rate and forced errors in defence. They've shown to have the ability to score lots of points. Their weakness, however, is their failure to maintain discipline through games, and they give away a high number of penalties that could result in the team not gaining possession for long periods of time. Opportunities against Illawarra include their left side of defence, which is shown to be fairly fragile. If we direct our attack down the right side of the field, we should be able to break through their defence. However, we need to be wary that Illawarra are a fast and exciting team when given open space. If we make errors in the game, we'll be at risk of conceding tries due to their flair.